Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, a full-blown trade war is underway. President Trump imposed 25% tariffs on $50 billion worth of China-made goods and promised to add more if Beijing retaliated, which it promptly did. Plus, Facebook is teaming up with academics for collaborations and studies, what this new partnership means for your data on the platform. And a crisis is building in the Pacific Ocean in the form of a mass of garbage totaling 80,000 metric tons, and it's bigger than we thought. We will show you the latest technology being deployed to clean it up. But first, to our top story. The U.S. and China now past the brink of a trade war. On Friday, the Trump administration announced 25% tariffs on $50 billion worth of Chinese imports. China, for its part, wasted no time in retaliating. Beijing promised to hit back at the U.S. with, quote, equal scale, equal intensity, and it has now announced it will levy tariffs on $50 billion worth of U.S. goods. President Trump, speaking on Fox and Friends, was resolute in his decision.
The trade war was started many years ago by them, and the United States lost.
So you're saying we're on the losing end of it?
Well, no, there is no trade war. They've taken so much. So last year, $375 billion in trade deficit. We had a 300 with China. We had overall over $800 billion over a period of years. Each year, close to $800 billion in losses on trade. It's not going to happen anymore.
Right.
The list of goods affected has a heavy tech bent as the Trump administration continues its focus on the Made in China 2025 initiative, which is meant to help Beijing become the global leader in technology. Joining me now from Washington to discuss in depth, Amy Selico, a principal at the Albright Stonebridge Group, and Edward Alden, the Bernard Schwartz Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you both so much for joining us. Edward, I'll start with you. If indeed these are the first shots fired in an official trade war, what comes next?
Well, I mean, we still have a couple of steps to go before the tariffs actually get imposed. So what the administration has said is as of July 6th, 25% tariffs on an initial tranche of goods totaling about $36 billion will be imposed, and then there'll be a second tranche. The Chinese have said they're going to hit back exactly in kind, and as you noted at the outset, the president is promising that to then escalate further. So I think we could be at the opening of a real escalating trade conflict between the U.S. and China. I'm one of those who hesitates to use the term trade war. I think it's overused, but I think we are actually in one right now.
Amy, would you agree? And how rough is this ride going to be?
I would agree. And in addition to what's already been said, of course, today, the U.S. Trade Representative talked about the next steps being investment restrictions placed on China in the United States, and then there's been talk also of visa restrictions. And so it's going to get worse before it gets better, surely.
Edward, if it gets worse before it gets better, what is next? How does the tit for tat play out?
I mean, I don't think we know exactly. The Trump administration does unexpected things. So, in the related trade conflict with Canada and Mexico and the Europeans over steel and aluminum, Trump recently announced an investigation into auto imports. So that's the next step there. With China, we don't know exactly. The president has said if China responds, then the U.S. will come up with a list of an additional $100 billion worth of products. He said that 6 weeks or so ago. We haven't actually seen that list yet. There could be other measures, as Amy mentioned, these investment restrictions that are coming. And then the Chinese presumably will have their own ways to respond. They have been warning U.S. multinational companies who are invested there that U.S. companies could be hit with a variety of penalties. So there's a lot of uncertainty, but I think it's pretty clear that more is coming.
Amy, I want to talk a little bit about what this means for technology. Looking at the products on the list, you have parts of nuclear reactors, parts of ATMs, LEDs, touchscreens, but not consumer products like mobile phones and televisions. What does that signal?
Well, I do think the administration was cognizant that they didn't want to harm consumers as much as they wanted to harm Chinese technology companies and consumers of technology in China. Now, I don't think that strategy is going to be effective. I think this is going to impact the American economy. as much as it's going to impact the Chinese economy, in part because of Chinese retaliation, not technology specific. But on technology issues in particular, of course, U.S. companies buy a lot of components from China. And so we are going to see a real impact for us, even though I agree with the administration that Chinese policies, unfair trade practices, stealing intellectual property, forcing technology transfers, and localization of data are harming U.S. technology companies. They've been forced to deal with these restrictions for years, and the restrictions continue to grow rather than shrink. So absolutely there's a problem for our technology companies as China wants to obviously indigenize a lot of technology manufacturing and innovation in China. However, tariffs aren't going to help solve this problem.
What does it mean, Edward, for China-based companies, given what's on their list and our list?
Well, I mean, again, we'll have to kind of see what the next moves are, but this just creates a great deal of uncertainty. It creates uncertainty for foreign companies invested in China, both how their exports are going to be affected and whether they may be hit by the retaliation. For Chinese-owned companies, again, a lot of uncertainty. Will they be able to do acquisitions in the United States? Will further products be hit by additional tariffs? So, you know, we've had in this very large trade relationship a fair bit of predictability. A lot of it not working particularly well for certain U.S. companies, as Amy has pointed out, but the rules reasonably well known. The rules are now very uncertain going forward, and I think all businesses are going to have to try to come up with what's their plan B if this continues to escalate.
So, Amy, let's talk a little bit about, ZTE and how what we have seen there, the message that sends to both countries.
Yeah, it's a really interesting case study, and I think quite timely for the Chinese to use our remedy against ZTE's bad behavior. It broke U.S. sanctions law and so was being punished. The punishment was going to potentially, of course, put the company out of business. And so President Xi used that as a case study of why China needs to develop its own technology and not rely on American technology in the future. And so thereby doubling down on his Made in China 2025 plans, the same plans that, of course, the U.S. government is quite critical of, that the plans, this industrial policy, is very focused on minimizing the role of foreign technology players in the China market. The China market, which this year will likely become the largest consumer market in the world. It's a tough market to be shut out of.
I do have a chart here in my GTV library that shows the amount of imports coming from China. The red line is at about $50 billion, and you can see that there are many more imports from China that are as yet not affected. Edward, could all of these other goods be at risk?
Well, this is interesting. This is President Trump's theory. So his notion is that because we buy so much more from the Chinese than they buy from us, they are more vulnerable. So let's say the administration follows this $50 billion with an additional $100 billion. That basically covers all Chinese exports to the United States, whereas, that basically, if the Chinese retaliate, that would cover all U.S. exports to China. They wouldn't be able to hit us anymore, whereas we would still have hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese exports to sanction. So this is the president's theory as to why trade wars are good and easy to win, because we're running this large deficit. I don't think it plays out that way, because I think the Chinese are going to be able to target sectors. You look at agriculture, soybeans. China's the largest soybean market for the United States. I think China's going to be able to target sectors that are going to do some real economic harm here in the United States, are going to create a lot of political pressure on the administration. A lot of these are Trump states. But this is sort of a clash of belief systems. The president believes that because we buy so much more, we have more leverage. Chinese don't see it that way. And normally when you have these kinds of misperceptions, the outcome is not a good one.
Amy, remind us what the Chinese President Xi Jinping believes and how this will impact his Made in China initiative.
Well, I think this is, again, going to just reinforce President Xi's belief that China does have to indigenize technology manufacturing. I completely agree with Edward that the uncertainty here is overwhelming, in part because President Xi and the Chinese government doesn't actually understand what the United States wants specifically to achieve here. And so they have tried to use a little bit of checkbook diplomacy to buy their way out of this trade war, promising to increase purchases of American goods and services. President Trump today said that's not enough. We want to deal with the underlying issues that are harming the U.S. economy, and that is China's unfair trade practices. What President Xi believes is these are national security issues, and national security issues, according to the Chinese government, are not going to be part of trade negotiations with the United States. Once again, this makes me believe that we are in for a tough time because both sides can't really make concessions on these issues.
All right, rough ride ahead. Amy Selico of the Albright Stonebridge Group and Edward Alden of the Council on Foreign Relations, thank you both. Ford Motor Company is looking at developing a new way to tell self-driving cars the best route to take. Think Waze for your autonomous car. Ford is working with startup RideOS on this endeavor. On Friday, RideOS also announced $9 million in funding led by venture capital firm Sequoia. RideOS, which was started by 2 former Uber employees, plans to sell software that gives routes and other dispatching instruction to fleets of autonomous cars. Coming up, if you are a Facebook user, you are also a research subject. We take a look at the social network's academic collaborations and dive in to how the company chooses projects next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. On Thursday, Facebook's top policy and communications executive announced he is stepping down. Elliot Schrage ends a decade of influence over the social network's public profile that has culminated in a reckoning about its impact on society. So what does this mean for the future of the social network and its ongoing policy issues? Joining us now from New York, Techonomy CEO and our Bloomberg contributor, David Kirkpatrick. Also with me here in the studio, Bloomberg Tech Sarah Friar, who of course covers all things Facebook. Now, we have not seen a single head roll since this whole Cambridge Analytica scandal exploded. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg has said, it's my fault, the buck stops with me. But is Elliot Schrage the first person to go as a result of this?
Well, I think it's clearly not being portrayed as anything like that. I mean, they're not even using the word leaving the company. They're saying he's stepping down from the role and he's going to continue on as an advisor and help pick a successor. Elliot has been through a decade of Facebook. Just imagine the drama this man has had to deal with, like from the IPO to privacy scandal after privacy scandal, apology after apology, and you know, this is an era. He's a political guy. He's helped Facebook become this very political defense company in some ways, and they're getting into this part of their evolution where they are so much more involved with politics. So it is kind of an interesting time for departure, especially considering the Facebook shareholder who called him out for being sexist just last week.
What happened there?
He had said that the reason that Facebook wasn't listening to her concerns was because she wasn't nice. And she called out that that's one of the things that Sheryl Sandberg says we disproportionately say to women, and called out as a sexist comment. He later apologized and sent her a letter. So that was the latest drama.
Which is interesting, David, of course, since Elliot Schrage has always been perceived as Sheryl Sandberg's person, the person that she brought over from Google 10 years ago. And as I understand it, you have a slightly different read on this. I mean, do you think this is because of all of the tumult over the last few months and perhaps a failure on his part to deal with it?
Well, whether it's him alone or a more systemic problem is pretty hard to determine from the outside, since it's really still a very secretive company. by the way, something that he has worked very hard to maintain. But I think clearly, if you look at his dual roles as head of policy and head of communications, there have been significant failures for the company on both counts. You know, policy is not just about getting the laws and regulations you want. It's also about listening to the regulators, assessing the landscape, bringing that message back into the company and helping it adapt to the world in which it's operating. I don't think that's gone well at all. From a communications standpoint, the head of PR is supposed to be the guy who makes the world feel good about the company, and that is absolutely not what has happened. So if I were Mark and Sheryl looking at, you know, just the net result of his leadership in those two areas, I would have to say, much as they like him and much as he has been effective most of his time there, it's not working now. One thing that I wonder, considering how close he has been to Sheryl Sandberg, is how comfortable she's going to be with him being gone. Maybe that's the reason why he's still going to be an advisor. She has been extremely dependent on him, by my analysis, in many, many ways for a lot of her activities and helping her decide how to behave.
Meantime, Sarah, you have a new piece out about Facebook research and how we are all, in fact, Facebook research subjects. Explain.
This piece explores the different problems that come with having a company that is so powerful in the world that people want to study, but then also having these concerns around that data privacy and also being a business and wanting to study the things first and foremost that help the products grow and evolve. Facebook is coming to recognize that issues like its impact on society, on elections, on news consumption, these are things that they should be looking at for business reasons. And this relationship they have with researchers is very strange. There are some deals where they just hand a researcher $25,000 and say, go look into whatever you want. But if you actually want Facebook's data, they have these more integrated partnerships that give them a right of refusal over whatever you're going to publish, which incentivizes people to not publish the really hard things. And they're trying to fix this. They're working on this election research commission, but it's still going to be very difficult for the company to get to a place where they can be more transparent about tackling these issues.
Meantime, David, you know, despite all of the controversies that we have covered over the last several months, you know, you wrote about this on techonomy.com. It certainly seems like public opinion of Facebook is down. It's not great, and yet Facebook says engagement hasn't been impacted, and certainly Wall Street hasn't been impacted because the stock has rebounded and investors seem pretty happy. How do we square that?
Well, the bottom line is that advertisers don't have any alternative place that can give them the kind of results that Facebook can give, and therefore they're continuing to advertise. The revenues and the profits are continuing to come in. Wall Street is more or less therefore happy. I think Wall Street needs to think more long-term about Facebook's risks, though, because I think the electoral issues that Sarah mentioned before are the central thing that most disturb and worry me. In fact, I'm just coming today from a meeting I'm going back to at Columbia, where there's a day-long discussion of internet governance issues, and this issue of Facebook and its impact on politics is one of the top issues that academic researchers in internet governance, at political science, and a number of other areas are really honing in on. And there is serious concern in academia and elsewhere about what's happening to our democracies around the world, not just in the United States or the UK or EU, everywhere because of Facebook. So that's a serious problem. I do think the thing Sarah mentioned about the electoral research is a very positive sign of Facebook's willingness to make itself more open, because they're doing some very unusual things as part of that project to make their data available.
Now, Sarah, Snap came with an answer to Facebook this week saying, we're going to give developers tools for the very first time to, develop for our platform, but we're not going to give them any of the data. Talk to us about what this actually means.
So it helps sometimes to be the one learning from the people who've come before you. Snap isn't giving any data to developers, just the Bitmoji, which is like that avatar that looks like you, little stickers that you can make. that look like you, and the handle, like just the username for Snap. And those are the only two things that developers really get when they connect with Snap. Now, is that going to give developers any incentive to actually build tools for Snap? Maybe Snap doesn't care about it being an incredibly successful developer platform in terms of the data exchange. Snap isn't even getting any data out of it themselves to target back into advertising. So it's quite unusual.
David, do you think there's any chance that Snap can turn this Facebook situation into, a way to combat its own plateauing and struggling growth? Can Snap turn Facebook's mistakes into its own growth story?
I think from the standpoint of some advertisers, they already have. I mean, in some ways, Snap is structured more like traditional television advertising. You're really doing mass messaging to much more broadly defined groups of recipients, not typically data advertising targeted to individual people based on their profiles. And, you could argue on the one hand that's not going to allow them to profit nearly as much. On the other hand, in a world where the concerns about data-based ad targeting are growing by the day, and they're growing globally, and I think will eventually extend even to the developing markets, Snap could, in the long term, if it can survive, be positioned well to profit from that. So I do think it's possible, and I know there are many top leaders at Snap who believe on a principled basis and on a strategic basis that this can be a benefit for them.
All right. Techonomy CEO and our Bloomberg contributing editor, David Kirkpatrick, as well as Sarah Fryer for Bloomberg Tech. Thank you both. Coming up, Google releases new statistics on the makeup of its workforce. And there's not much improvement, but there is more transparency. We'll discuss. This is Bloomberg. A few stories. We're watching Broadcom cut about 1,100 jobs following its purchase of Brocade Communications and said it may reduce headcount further. The company took charges of more than $100 million, mainly related to cutting staff, according to a regulatory filing. Nintendo's biggest shareholder gave another vote of confidence in the company. Capital Group boosted its stake in Nintendo after the worst sell-off in almost 3 years earlier this week. The stock was under pressure under concerns that management has exhausted its lineup of games for the hybrid console Switch. I caught up with Nintendo America President and COO Reggie Fils-Aimé earlier this week at the E3 conference in LA, where he was championing some of the company's successes.
We believe there's a lot more value for the consumer to tell them about content and then launch it, just like we did for Fortnite. And Fortnite already has 2 million downloads specifically on the Nintendo Switch.
Wow.
So for us, by surprising the fans and driving this type of excitement, we're able to move the business forward.
And Alphabet has released a new diversity report for 2018 disclosing the gender and racial makeup of its workforce. This is the first diversity report the company has released since the controversial memo from former employee James Damore, which resulted in his firing. Google reported women make up just over 30% of its workforce, not much of an improvement, and the majority of its employees are white. Representation for Black and Hispanic employees barely increased, but Google included some new measures to add more transparency to their report. Coming up, Apple continues to push into original content and is bringing in the big guns to do the job. We'll bring you details of Apple's new partnership with who else but Oprah next. And later, China's ZTE was fighting for its very survival when President Trump helped engineer a settlement. We will look back on how the company came back from the brink and whether it's really in the clear as global trade tensions rise. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. A story at the heart of the U.S.-China trade talks has been ZTE. Republican senators are now pushing to keep stiff sanctions on the company, setting up a potential showdown with the White House. Bloomberg Tech's managing editor for Asia, Peter Elstrom, brings us up to speed in this Bloomberg Quick Take from Tokyo.
China's ZTE usually doesn't draw much attention in the technology industry, but this year it's landed in the headlines like never before, and not for reasons it would like. ZTE ran into trouble for violating U.S. laws restricting the sale of American technology to Iran and North Korea. An agreement last year called for the company to pay as much as $1.2 billion and penalize the workers involved. But in April, the U.S. Commerce Department said ZTE had not lived up to the terms of that settlement. Instead, the company paid full bonuses to employees engaged in illegal conduct and then lied about it. That led to a 7-year ban on ZTE's ability to buy from American suppliers, essentially a death sentence for the business. The company ceased most operations just weeks later. But then Donald Trump came to ZTE's rescue with a stunning tweet. He said he and China's Xi Jinping would work to get ZTE back into business and fast. The move was seen as a key demand from China as the world's 2 largest economies try to avoid a trade war. Under the new agreement, ZTE will pay at least $1 billion in penalties and replaced all its senior leadership and all its board of directors. The company's shares resumed trading Wednesday after a 2-month freeze and promptly plunged. ZTE is not in the clear yet. The U.S. Congress is working to stop Trump's rescue effort. Even at home, China National Radio said the country's firms shouldn't act like giant babies and expect Beijing to bail them out when they get in trouble abroad.
Bloomberg's Peter Elstrom in Tokyo. Well, Apple has seen growth in its services business driven by sales in the App Store, AppleCare, licensing, music. But if you take a look at my terminal, you can find this chart in the GTV library, and you will see that growth in Apple services is happening, but it generates nowhere near as much revenue as the iPhone. Services is that blue bar. Our next guest argues it is difficult to see how services can ever replace hardware sales as a long-term driver of growth for the company. Chris Casco from Raymond James joins us now from New York. Chris, can it ever come close?
Well, certainly the reason why services has been of primary interest to investors recently is because that's been a main driver of growth in the first half of the year as iPhone sales have slowed. And that's really the question going forward is, can services continue to be that engine of growth? What we were arguing earlier this week is that services is really an offshoot of the hardware business, and one part of that, for example, is the AppleCare business, which we believe the street has underestimated as a percentage of the total services growth. And AppleCare is their warranty program, and of course warranties are just an offshoot of hardware sales. It comes with a lag because the warranty is accounted for over a 24-month life of the warranty. But of course, if hardware sales were to flatten or to decline, that would obviously affect the warranty sales as well. The other point that we made was regarding the rest of the business. We call the digital media part of the business, including things like iTunes and the App Store. In that case, it just really suffers from a law of large numbers problem, and that services business, while it's a smaller part of Apple's business today, it's a huge business relative to everything else out there. And one of the points that we made is, even if Apple were to, for example, build a business that was equal in size to Netflix with 125 million subscribers, around $10 a month, it would only add about 2% to Apple's earnings, which gives you an indication of that law of large numbers problem the company faces in that services growth.
We're going to talk about Apple's aspirations to take on Netflix in a moment, but first, every conversation I have with Tim Cook, he talks about services, he talks about the great potential here. Will new devices coming in the fall, new phones, could that change the fortunes of this business? Well,
I think for the fall, and what we're expecting, what I think is generally expected across the street, is that this fall's phones are just evolutionary. What we expect is, a refresh version of iPhone 10, perhaps a larger screen version, we'll call it the 10 Plus, and then a mid-tier version. I don't think that really changes the mix all that much in terms of what people, again, that services business, and what I think Tim is trying to do is to increase the amount of dollars per user. And right now we expect, there's somewhere in the range of 750 million, total iOS users out there. And if you can get another couple dollars from them, that's great. But again, relative to the size of the hardware business, it's very difficult to do.
Now, meantime, Apple announced it is partnering with Oprah. We don't know a lot about the deal, but we know that it's about original video content. It's a multi-year partnership. Apple's already got deals with Reese Witherspoon, Kristen Wiig, J.J. Abrams. How impactful do you think this could be?
We really don't know the details of it at this time. Again, the ability, bringing someone like Oprah on the platform, it contributes to perhaps the stickiness of the iOS platform, and it's one more reason to have an iPhone as opposed to an Android phone. In terms of monetizing that remains to be seen.
Meantime, Netflix has signed deals with Shonda Rhimes, with the Obamas. We've got a big shakeup coming with Disney getting into streaming, potentially buying 21st Century Fox. There's a bidding war going on with Comcast. You know, what do you think Apple's ability is to really compete in this original programming market? We've seen some of their initial forays, like Planet of the Apps, for example, which have not been successful.
Right. Well, and certainly they can. It's a huge company. They've got a tremendous amount of resource. So certainly, if they choose to get into that media business, they absolutely can. The question is, how profitable will it be for the company, and how much will it add to the profits? And again, you know, using that Netflix example, you know, we'd say, you know, a business size of Netflix, which took Netflix a long time for them to build that business, it'd only be about 2% of Apple's earnings. And of course, the problem is if you're creating that content is very expensive, and that's the core of the issue.
All right. Well, I, for one, want to know what Oprah is going to be doing for Apple. Chris Casco of Raymond James, thank you so much for joining us. Meantime, Amazon is facing more questions about the incident last month where an Oregon couple had their private conversation recorded on their Amazon Echo and sent to an acquaintance without their knowledge. U.S. Senators Jeff Flake and Chris Coons wrote to Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos requesting information about the technical design and privacy features of Echo devices and the Alexa digital assistant platform. An Amazon spokesperson couldn't immediately be reached for comment. Coming up, the internet has shaken the ad business to its core. We speak to New Yorker writer Ken Auletta, who chronicles the rise of the new digital Madison Avenue in his book Frenemies, next. And this weekend on Bloomberg Television, we bring you our best interviews from the week, including our combo with Take-Two Interactive CEO Strauss Zelnick from E3 in LA. Tune in this Saturday for the best of Bloomberg technology. This is Bloomberg. Your personal data, your birthday, the city you live in, your musical or television tastes, these things and more are craved by online companies ranging from Facebook to Google to Twitter and beyond. The ultimate prize for that information, advertising dollars. And the kings, when it comes to cashing in, are Facebook and Google. Now, our next guest has written a new book about the digital advertising world. It's called Frenemies, the epic disruption of the ad business and everything else. Ken Auletta, welcome to Bloomberg Technology. A little Freudian slip there, destruction, because the ad business has been completely transformed by Google and Facebook and beyond. They're far more enemies than friends, though, right?
No, they're both. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, if you look at the growth of Facebook and Google's advertising, that's coming from ad agencies and clients, and now it exceeds the amount of money spent on television ads. So they're friends in that way. They're frenemies in the sense that they disintermediate them and go directly to the clients. You
make the point, which I feel like we all know but don't understand the extent of how much advertisers know about us as a result of Facebook and Google. What did you find that was the most disturbing?
Well, I mean, for instance, when they talk about the future, they know the public is a frenemy and that the public doesn't like your ads, particularly on their cell phones. They don't want to be interrupted. So they say, instead of an ad, maybe we have to do it differently. Let's offer a service to people. So Ken, well, you're in San Francisco and you're walking a block or two away from Barney's right now. They know that from your GPS. And if you bought a sport jacket 2 months ago, if you go into Barney's now, we'll give you 20% off your next sport jacket. So how am I going to respond to that? Am I going to say, this is great, it's a service, it's not an ad? Or am I going to say, how the hell do you know so much about me? That's the question.
Well, and it seems like public opinion, the tide is sort of turning against that, but I wonder if this privacy backlash is just a moment or if it will actually result in long-term us wanting to hold back information from these companies.
I don't know the answer to that. I know what it means in Western Europe, where 28 countries have joined together to impose privacy standards. But there's a history of privacy concerns in Europe. There isn't in the U.S. I was in my hotel yesterday in San Francisco, and I was doing an interview on the phone with a reporter, and I said, well, when you have Alexa, for instance, and suddenly there's an Alexa in my hotel room, I didn't even know, and said, yes? How the hell are you? What are you doing? So it kind of spooks you out.
Let's talk about Amazon, because if I add Amazon to the equation, right now Facebook and Google are really a duopoly in the digital ad business. But some say that Amazon is closing in on Facebook and that in the next 5 years could surpass Facebook. Would you agree?
I would. Amazon is aggressively getting into the ad business for the first time, A. B, if you think about the data that each company has, Google has your search results, what you're interested in. Facebook has what you and your friends are talking about. What Amazon has, which is what the advertiser covets, is what you purchased.
What you're actually buying.
That is a holy grail. And if they convert that, they're a big player. For instance, if you do a search for a product on Amazon today, half the searches are not done on Google search. They're done on Amazon. That's disrupting Google. So these guys are going at each other, not just at changing the ad business, but at changing each other.
So how do you think the hierarchy will shift, let's say in 5 years? You know, how big a threat is this? Let's talk about Facebook in particular, because of all of the controversy surrounding Facebook right now and the public backlash. We haven't seen it in the stock. But do you think Facebook is really under threat?
Well, I mean, I covered the Microsoft trial in 2000. And Microsoft was accused of being a monopoly, was found guilty of being a monopoly. And it changed their behavior. They basically pulled back, they became tentative, and they lost a lot of momentum in the next decade.
They're only just now getting it back.
And they've really gotten it back, their mojo. But this could happen to Facebook. Don't forget, Mark Zuckerberg, we think of him as an automaton. You know, he's an engineer, he's a coder. He's a human being. He's got 2 kids, he's got a wife, he contributes to, he's embarrassed. He's got to be shamed by the attacks on him. Will that alter his behavior and Facebook's? And will the threat of regulation from government alter Facebook's behavior? We don't know the answer to that yet.
Let's take a listen to Mark Zuckerberg, the human being, testifying before Congress a couple of months ago. Listen to what he had to say about whether a subscription model would ever be possible.
We think offering an ad-supported service is the most aligned with our mission of trying to help connect everyone in the world, because we want to offer a free service that everyone can afford.
So from there, it sounds like this will always be an ad-supported service, and yet the company is exploring a subscription service. You know, could that ever be a mainstream reality?
2.2 billion consumers on Facebook. There's no way they're going to substitute free for subscription. You could, like Hulu does, like YouTube does. Some people, if they don't want ads, they pay a little extra. The problem with subscriptions replacing advertising is if you go with the 2016 campaign, the one thing Trump and Clinton agreed on was the American middle class and working class, the bulk of the population, was frozen in their income for 10 years. The thought that they can afford steeper subscriptions, it's a pipe dream.
Now, I want to talk about the fourth frenemy, which isn't so much in the ad business, but is really positioning itself as an enemy of Facebook specifically, and that is Apple, which is, you know, adding more privacy controls, taking a stand very publicly, now notifying users about when apps want more of their information. Do you think Apple's going to be on the right side of history here?
I don't know, but I mean, they're on the right side of a business strategy. And the business strategy, they're not in the advertising business, nor is Microsoft to an appreciable extent, and both take a privacy position, attacking Facebook and Google. So it's a nice positioning for a company. Do they mean it? I mean, I can't climb inside Tim Cook's head. Let's assume he does mean it. Does that mean that Apple is doing fine? I don't think they need any help. And they sell a luxury good, and they sell it. But they're at war. Facebook, Google, Apple, and Amazon, and Microsoft. It's a galactic battle going on.
All right, Ken Auletta, author of Frenemies. This is your 12th book. Your 12th book.
I know.
I don't know how you do it. I could barely do one. All right, thank you so much for joining us, and writer for The New Yorker. All right, coming up, one startup is getting serious about cleaning up the waste and trash in the Pacific Ocean, grabbing the attention of tech leaders like Mark Benioff and Peter Thiel. We'll show you how. This is Bloomberg. It seems like an impossible task, collecting the 1.8 trillion pieces of plastic trash currently floating amongst the ocean currents. Nonprofit startup The Ocean Cleanup's goal is to address this massive issue, and it took a big step closer this week. Its collection system, a black tube as long as a football field, is setting sail for the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in early September. Joining us now, the founder of The Ocean Cleanup, Boyan Slat. Boyan, thank you so much for joining us. So you are assembling this right now across the bay in Alameda, and you are setting sail in September for this garbage patch. Talk to me about the technology behind this and how the cleanup will work.
Sure. So in the past, people proposed to clean this up with boats and nets to sort of go out and fish for plastic. But the thing is that the ocean is so vast, this area is twice the size of Texas, that if you were to do this, this would take 80,000 years. So what we do is we've developed a passive system that uses very long U-shaped floating barriers that are pushed around by the natural ocean currents so that the nature can really do the hard work for us. So that way we can first concentrate the plastic before we take it out. And now we see that if we were to deploy a fleet of 60 of these systems, we should be able to clean up half the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in just 5 years' time.
Talk to us about some of the efforts to clean this up in the past and why they haven't worked.
Yeah, well, so the ocean is very big, so it's a vast area. It would take 80,000 years to clean up just this one patch if you were to do it that way. It would be very expensive, it would kill a lot of sea life, create emissions, so not such an attractive proposal.
So you think that you can clean up how much of this?
So we think we can clean up half of it in 5 years and eventually get to a 90% reduction by 2040.
Now, some in the scientific community are skeptical that you can do that. What is your response to them?
Sure. I mean, we've done extensive testing over the past 4 years. On one side, we've done the reconnaissance. We've mapped the patch for the first time ever, actually. And we've done hundreds of scale model tests, prototypes. And of course, there's really only one way to find out, and that's to actually launch a first system, which we're doing this summer.
There are some regulatory issues, but you actually have gotten the green light from the Dutch government to operate in international waters. So, you know, are there any more hurdles that you need to clear to do this?
Yeah, so indeed we recently signed an agreement with the Dutch government who actually for the first time ever has given an unmanned structure permission to be deployed in international waters. Other than that, it's mostly technical, so of course you can have seas up to 80 feet high in terms of waves, so really making sure that this doesn't break and that it catches plastic efficiently. That's what we're putting the system to test for.
Now tell me a little bit about yourself. You're 23 years old. This all started with a TEDx talk.
Yeah.
Mark Benioff is a backer of your company, the CEO of Salesforce. You were a Teal Fellow.
Right.
Talk to me about your path.
Yeah, I think I've always been quite an inventor all my life. I've been making things since I was 2 years old. When I was 12 or 13, I decided to launch 250 model rockets at the same time. So I always had my projects, but it wasn't very useful. And then when I was 16 years old, I was scuba diving in Greece, saw more plastic bags than fish, and I wondered, why can't we just clean this up? And that's how it got started.
You've raised tens of millions of dollars, about $40 million.
Right.
Is there money to be made here?
No, so we are a non-profit entity, and yeah, of course it's no man's land, nobody really takes responsibility, but the idea is that eventually we'll have 60 systems out there, and basically any individual or company can fund their own systems. You can imagine these systems are a kilometer in length, there's plenty of space for logos, the world is watching, so that way really through sponsorship money and philanthropy money, we think we can get the systems out there. And then, of course, we'll be collecting a lot of plastic, which we want to sell, turn into new products, and that way cover the operational costs of the cleanup. So once they're out there, we think we can pay for themselves.
Now, obviously, this garbage patch looks horrifying, but why does this matter? You know, how does garbage in the middle of the ocean, how does that impact me?
Yeah, there's really three problems. So first of all, there's hundreds of species that are threatened with extinction because of this, which is pretty bad. And then it's an economic threat, $13 billion of damage the plastic is causing through fishing and tourism. And then finally, what happens is that these tiny pieces, they end up in the food chain, and with that also ends up with humans, taking chemicals with them, which could cause potential health threats to humans as well.
How much of this waste is caused by corporations and companies? I mean, you have companies like Apple out there saying we're going to be 100% renewable.
Right.
But what is the responsibility of the industry?
Yeah, so we see a lot of fishing gear out there, for example, but most of the debris is actually just a very dispersed source. It's the hands of 7.2 billion people that use plastic and sometimes don't take care of it properly.
Can this scale?
Well, yeah, so I think we're confident that once we have the first system working, that then starting next year we can scale this up to the 60 systems and really rid the oceans of plastic.
All right, setting sail in September. We will keep our eyes on you.
It will be an exciting month for sure. Yeah.
Boyan, how long do you think you guys will be out there?
So the first system will be out for at least a year, and of course, if we then see it works, then of course we want to leave it out for 20 years. But definitely we'll keep San Francisco as a base for us for quite a while.
And you have a team of 70 engineers, researchers, right, computer scientists working on this.
Sure.
You know, how does technology need to improve to get you past that halfway point?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, it was at the beginning, I wasn't sure that people actually wanted to clean the oceans. I thought, well, maybe people don't care. And then eventually, when this all went viral, our project, well, then I think it really became clear, well, people do think this is very important. It's just that there isn't any tool yet to do it. So that's why we then focused on really developing the tools, the technologies to rid the oceans of plastic.
All right, we will be watching Boyan Slat, founder of the Ocean Cleanup. Thank you so much for joining us. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. On Monday, we're going to be talking about the future of fintech with Affirm CEO and PayPal co-founder Max Levchin. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.
Percent of the S&P 500 members match